Everybody, welcome to Cast and Court TV. This is your girl, Miss Public Info, here with the latest and greatest and sometimes hated updates of the most high-profile cases going on around the country. Okay, guys, this is actually a more of a private episode. I'm going to do two episodes today. This episode is actually a personal episode, right? The next episode will be about a noteworthy case that we've all been hearing about. So we'll go as scheduled as normal. So, you guys may have heard me mention the interview process that I was in just last week. I interviewed with the District Attorney's Office of Clark County, which is probably more commonly known as the Las Vegas District Attorney's Office. And in that interview, first of all, let me just say that it was a public information officer interview. You guys know that I've been a public information officer at a district attorney's office handling some of the most high profile cases going on around the globe, really. Mass shootings, death penalty cases, all sorts of kinds of cases that I've handled while in the district attorney's office there in Colorado. I've been a publicist and comms and media consultant and professional, a vice president of an entire division. I've been doing that for almost 20 years. So, in saying all of that, this particular interview that I was doing it because I wanted to get a full-time job. I'm right now I'm a consultant, so I'm kind of bouncing around from here to there, working on this, that, and the third because of the fact that the economy is kind of crazy. I was in entertainment for the last 15 years. The entertainment industry is kind of down the tubes, especially as it relates to people like myself. I'll get to more of that in a minute, but it's I found myself in multiple reduction in forced layoffs over the last few years. So I've had to, become a consultant, do, contract work here and there, etc. So this opportunity with Clark County came up, and I took the opportunity. I live in Los Angeles, so Nevada, Las Vegas is right next door. So I've always loved Las Vegas, and have a plans to maybe move there anyway in the future. So I applied for it. You do it through the county, so there's no like personal, anything going on like that. And I apparently tested well enough to be put on the eligibility list. The next day, after I got the eligibility email, they wanted to schedule an interview. So I did the first interview via virtual, just like this on Zoom. And then after that, they wanted to see me. They asked me. Now, in this virtual interview, it was District Attorney Steve Wolfson, and then it was like five, I think five or six other people on the panel, which included chief deputies of various divisions, and I believe their HR person was there. So they asked me, Chief Wolfson himself asked if I'd be willing to come in for a second interview in person there in Las Vegas. And I said I would. He also said in that interview that I was the only candidate that ever had that job specifically. Like other public information officers out of the 26 of us that he had interviewed, they were public information officers, but no one but me had ever been a public information officer for a district attorney. So I was kind of like, in solo company with that. Okay. He went on to say that they had 123 applicants, and that out of the 123 applicants, there were 26 people that they interviewed in the first round. And so I was part of the 26 that was being interviewed. So then they asked me to come. My mother, myself, my aunt, we make a whole like couple of days of a road trip to do it. We like drive, my dogs came. It was like a whole thing. We drove from Los Angeles to Nevada. We got an Airbnb. We love Vegas anyway, so it was like a great road trip. The dogs wanted to get out. They need to get out, so it was fine, right? So we get an Airbnb. Obviously, this a cost incurs with this, right? So, yes, I'm looking for a job, but because this job is out of state, obviously it's a cost to me. Gas, renting a car, Airbnb, additional monies to spend. during this trip as well that you incur at your own expense. You know that that's what it is, but this will make a little bit more sense later as we go along in the journey of this very limited story time. So we get there, everything's fine, and the day of the interview comes. So I get there 30 minutes early because I'm an early girl and I like to be punctual. Also, those of you who are listening to me know that I talk about this a lot. I talked about it in one of the last episodes that as a Black professional, as a Black person in these particular rooms that you're going into, you represent everybody in the community, right? Because you are quite possibly, going to be speaking with people who don't have Black people in their lives. And the only Black people they ever see are the Black people that are defendants that they're prosecuting in the district attorney's office. So it's when you walk into rooms like this, you want to put your best foot forward, not only for you and your own career, but also for every single person and your community that you represent. Now, there may be people listening to this story who are not Black and who do not get that. And I'm so sorry that you don't understand. But Black people are a special kind of folk because we are people who do not clearly and obviously blend in with everyone else in the world. We can't just, pass this way and pass that way. Some of us are able to pass, as white folks or Latinos or whatever the case is. But for a vast majority of us, we're not doing that. So it does matter when you look and different, when you're a different looking person than the other applicants that are coming in, and you are also a different looking person than the people that you are interviewing in front of. You understand that that is going to be the first thing that they notice, that you are uh, physically different, that you're a Black person. They're going to notice that right away, even if they don't have any prejudices or racist feelings within themselves. They're going to notice that right off the rip because that is what is physical, right? Okay. So that is out of the way. And I must add too that in that virtual interview, there were no Black people on that panel. I do not know the ratio as it relates to the demographics in that office, but there were no Black people on the panel. And when I walked into the room in person there in Nevada, there were no Black people in that room. I was the only Black person in that room. And there were two women. One was, I believe, of Asian, or she could have been a Pacific Islander or Latina descent, and there was a white woman. But the other five individuals in the room were, I think there was four white men and one Asian male. So that was the demographics of the room, essentially, right? So I go in, I go and shake everyone's hand. I physically go and shake everyone's hand around that table because it's important that they know that I respect them. And so I'm, trying to start everything off on best foot forward. So then we start the interview. They ask me a few questions, and I'm talking about the social media plans that I would have for the office because that's something that their HR had actually asked the applicants to be prepared to speak to. So I was prepared to speak to that. Spoke about, what I observed on the website, some of the goals that I would, be looking at were I to get the job or whatnot, and et cetera, et cetera. So then they give me a hypothetical, and they have the woman of color asked me that particular question. And so I answer the question. And while I'm answering that question, or directly after answering that question, the district attorney, Steve Wolfson, stops and says to me, "You are trying too hard. You are trying too hard. You just need to relax. Just slow down. You're trying too hard." He said it twice, like repeatedly. And then he says to me, you have an impressive, background, very impressive. I know that you can do this job, is what he says. I know that you can do this job, but you're trying too hard. You just need to slow down. Take a breath. You need to slow down. You are trying too hard. You're very impressive. He kept saying that. So I don't know if his goal was to rattle me, which it did not, because I am used to people trying to rattle me in this way, uh, and just in general, because, they try to, sort of catch you off guard or disarm you verbally, professionally. So to sort of place you back in the spot in which they think you belong in, because I felt it was professionally disrespectful for him to stop me in that way and say, "You're trying too hard." I'm not trying too hard. This is who I am. I am presenting my qualifications. This is an interview. If you are not the utmost professional person in any other place in your life, you are that when it comes to your job, and you are that when it comes to a job that you want, that you're trying to get, right? So that's all I'm doing. Now I do know that sometimes I speak a little quickly. So I interpreted it at the moment as, okay, I will, speak rather a little slower for him so he can hear me, because apparently he's not understanding the things that I'm saying. But it was very clear throughout the remainder of the interview that that was not the issue, but that Steve Wolfson was not listening, and that he was not using his listening skills, that apparently he was thinking about something else, or he was already sort of thinking of ways to disqualify me for this job. And when he made that remark to the rest of the room, it disqualified me to everyone else who had a say so as to whether or not I would be a viable candidate. Because when the boss is already telling the first candidate up that they're trying too hard and you're doing this and you're not doing that, then that automatically lets the room know. It tempers the room to let the room know, I don't like this. This is not what I like. Now, I'll go on in conversation about the rest of the interview, but before that, I just want to say I think that DA Wolfson did not like, or Steve Wolfson did not like, that I was confident, that I was not only confident, but competent. And also, I think that he had a problem with the fact that I was a Black woman who was coming in there being competent, confident, intelligent, polished. I, wore a suit, a very nice black pinstripe suit. I was professional. I was all the things that I needed to be. I wasn't wearing a lot of the jewelry, wasn't wearing, red lipstick or anything like that, wasn't wearing a lot of makeup, wasn't wearing rings or any of the accessories that you see here. I was professional for that interview. Black and white, a pinstripe black and white suit. I was professional. And I think it caught him off guard. You're talking about a district attorney who is likely out of touch, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, who is likely out of touch as it relates to, meeting people of color, Black people who are educated, who know their jobs, who know how to handle themselves. They don't have a lot of Black prosecutors in that office, which nationwide, there is a problem with the disparity among prosecutors, that there are not a lot of Black prosecutors just in general. But that's another topic for another day. But I'm bringing it up is because he's probably not used to working around Black people in general. And then when you have a Black candidate that comes in and they are prepared and they are, showing you their portfolio over the last 13 years, a portfolio that was impressive, if I may say so myself, and which he also commented on, then it does disarm people, that they don't really feel like, it makes them feel uncomfortable, is what I mean by that, right? Because they're not used to seeing it and they don't know how to handle it. So then, as the remainder of the interview went on, he just continued to make disrespectful remarks to me. He says at one point, I want to know the real cast. I don't want to know this. I want to know the real cast, as though who I was bringing into that room was not the real cast. I don't know what you mean by that, sir. Of course, I didn't answer him, and I continued on in, answering the questions and being a viable candidate, or attempting to be a viable candidate, because it was apparent that I was already counted out after that point. But he just continued on. Then at one point, guys, he says to me, "Tell me a joke." as though I'm like some vaudeville act, some minstrel show. Tell you a joke? Are you serious right now? This is not professional. You know, he asked, I think he was asking about like, think personal things about me. Like, I know that, job interviews are much more than just, your resume and just you being a professional, that people want to see that you fit in with the culture that's there. At this office or organization or whatever it might be. But I have a strong problem with you saying to me, tell me a joke, because I said that one of my attributes is that I'm witty, and I am. I'm conversationally witty. And when he asked that question, oh, well, tell me a joke, I was highly offended. No. Do you not understand what that means? That doesn't mean that I'm funny, haha, which is exactly what I told him. I said, I'm not funny, haha. I would say I'm conversationally witty. That's more appropriate for me to say, because that would be the truth. When I went on to talk about the website, because they wanted me to talk about that, he says, well, you're not going to offend anyone in this room if you say that the website is terrible or whatever the case is. I said, well, I want to remain professional and tactful, so that's what I'm doing. And he says to me, well, I want the truth. And then he goes on to also say to me, did you say that you're not a morning person? I said, no, I'm not. I did not say that I'm not a morning person. I am all times of the day person, because you have to be in this job, right? And I said, actually, I referenced whether or not you are a morning person, and so at some point, he just wasn't listening. He had stopped listening in the interview. He went on to say that you do know that this job is not glamorous. I said, well, I have done this job and I know how it can be. It could be a tough job. You have the constituents and you have journalists who are, for lack of a better term, upset with you because you're not giving them what they want. But there's a way to temper all of that. As someone with my years of experience, I have no problem doing that, right? And so I just felt really discriminated against, because it was like, well, is this about the fact that I am a Black woman who is articulate, who is experienced, who is polished, who can handle herself, who's educated? Or is this about the fact that I am an attractive woman? I also felt like that was a problem, because he made the statement, well, this isn't glamorous. Well, what is this about? Is this, more about the job itself? Or are you making comments or trying to make a side comment about my exterior appearance? Listen, my exterior appearance has nothing to do with anything other than my DNA, which I can do nothing about, right? But in terms of the question, or the statement rather itself, I just made it where it just had to do with the job. I answered it in a way in which indicated that I was accepting the statement as just it doing having to do with the job itself, right? Now, Steve Wolfson, he I think it has been broadcasted in the local press that he is seeking a fourth term, which is very interesting to me that, in Nevada, they are not term limited. They should be. He has been the DA, I think, from somewhere around 2009 or so. He was appointed the DA, so he wasn't elected the DA at very first. He was appointed the DA, and then went on to be elected I think the year or two after. And this DA's office is very important to let you guys know that this is a white male ran district attorney's office in Clark County, Nevada. Okay. That this office has never had a woman DA. They had a woman who was an interim DA for, I think, maybe a year, for whatever the reasons were there, but they've never had a person of color, nor have they ever had a woman in that seat as a district attorney. And so, with all of that privilege going on, I felt that this Steve Wolfson person, was looking at me out of those glasses, and not out of glasses that were, you know, equitable, that showed parity. I don't think he showed me any parity or equity. I think that he was very disrespectful to me as a candidate coming in there. There's a whole lot of people who may surmise his behavior as him just being a jerk, and he was that. But also, when you are displaying these kinds of microaggressions, because though that's what that is, towards a black woman, then we have to tell the truth and we have to call a spade a spade. Okay. And the fact of the matter is that there is some prejudice there. And I knew when I walked out of that room, guys, that I did not have that job. When I came back on Friday to do the episode, at the top of the episode, I sort of explained where I've been and all of that. But I was very clear, even when I did that episode, that I did not get that job. And I am a woman of faith, and I asked God to send me where He wanted me to go. I also said that if this was going to be a place in which I could not thrive, and that I wouldn't get along with the DA, and that it just wouldn't be an affable relationship, that I didn't really want the job. And God made it so. When you ask God for something, you need to be ready for it, right? But that does not negate the fact that this individual was completely out of order, out of line. Now, the other things that happened, and there were so many, I just can't believe this person has been a district attorney for as long as he has, because he's just out of control, if you ask me. He showed all of his self in that interview, and I am just very appalled by his behavior. Also, the people that work for him, I'm sure they're used to it by now, but that is not behavior of a district attorney, a district attorney who holds a lot of power. Prosecutors do hold a lot of power, specifically the elected district attorney, right? So, they go on and they ask, just general things about myself, like, what television shows do you watch, things of that nature. So, one thing that's important to mention is that the last DA that I worked for in Colorado was a Republican. Like, she's a conservative, but I am not a conservative. I am not a Republican. And so, this particular DA that I was interviewing with in Nevada was or is rather, is a Democrat. Okay. And I think that he probably wanted to know what side of the aisle I was on, but knew that legally he couldn't ask that question. So he started asking questions about, well, what news programs do you watch? How do you consume your news? And I simply said, well, I don't really consume my news through television, and that I do so digitally. And he's like, oh, well, that's fair. But the way in which he was asking it, that's what he wanted to know. He wanted to know, like, well, is she a Dem, or is she, a Republican or whatever, instead of just looking at me as a candidate and not being inappropriate and asking questions that don't really matter. Now, as it relates to the job is a media job. It's, definitely uh, probably normal for you to ask someone about the ways in which they consume media, but to ask them specifically what television news programs that they watch is very interesting to me, especially when I think he followed that up with, well, you would be working side by side with me. Your office would be 30 feet from mine. Is that something that you think that you can handle? And I said, absolutely, I can. I've worked very closely with my last DA. I was with her all the time. I was her right hand. As you see in my portfolio, I showed action photos of myself with my last DA. So as you can see, like in those photos, I worked with her all the time. I had no problem with that. So no, I would have no issue with that. Well, I can't give you an office with a window. Is that fine for you? Yes, it is fine for me. I think he was trying to think of ways to disqualify me. And then he finally hit on one, guys, the salary. So he asked me about the salary. And he said, well, what are your salary requirements? Now, listen, we have talked about this. We have heard Michelle Obama, our first woman, former first woman, and big sister general, Kamala Harris. We have heard them talk about this, who was also a prosecutor, by the way. We have also heard them tell us time and time again, and other women as well, but these two specifically, don't shrink when it comes to talking about your worth to people who are asking in these spaces when it comes to jobs. Don't shrink who you are just so you can get the job, right? Don't shrink who you are. So part of not shrinking is saying that my requirements and that are related to my years of experience and the direct experience that I have being a public information officer, a media consultant, a director of communications for the district attorney's office, and also being a former vice president of public relations for a large strategic communications firm, global, mind you, that I would require the top salary. So with county and city jobs, they have like a low tier and then they have the high tier, kind of like a range with any job, right? So I would require a top range. And the reasons I just gave is the reasons for that. That those were my my reasons, right? So he says to me, well, the commissioner would never agree to that. He has a guy that's sitting next to him who is a chief deputy. I won't ID him because he is not an elected official, so therefore can't do that. But Steve Wolfson is an elected official, so I can ID him. But the guy that's sitting next to him directly to his left in the room started fervently shaking his head. Oh no. That the commissioner, whomever the commissioner is, that sort of, toes the line or directs rather traffic as it relates to the pay that this position in particular would receive would never go for that. He goes on to further disrespect me and my credentials by saying, well, I could start you in on entry level, no problem, you know. And then but anything more than that, I would need to, get permission or whatever the case is. And I said, well, that's my requirement. Like, I don't think I said that's my requirement, but I don't think I said anything at all. I just listened to him after I gave the requirement for which he asked for. And I just listened to him and the chief deputy sort of, murmur about that. And, he says, okay, well, we'll, something about he'll let me know or something to that nature. But throughout the entire interview process, he was looking for ways to disqualify me. And if someone were to ask him, he would say, "Well, she wanted too much money." Now, first of all, uh, for someone who's been doing this for over 20 years, you think I'm going to come in under, a certain amount? I'm not. Then he also says to me, that's what he said next. He says next to me, well, Nevada is different than Los Angeles. Like Vegas, he might have said, is different than Los Angeles as far as like pay rate is concerned. I said, yes, I'm aware that the cost of living is lower. But by the way, newsflash, and those of you who live in Nevada could definitely tell me the cost of living is lower in Nevada than it is in Los Angeles, but it is not that much lower. Also, I not at all was making my requirement about or measuring it up to California's cost of living because I would be moving to Nevada. So I already took that into consideration. I knew that Nevada's cost of living was lower, but at the same time, regardless if the cost of living is lower or not, you are going to pay me what I am worth. Okay. Long gone are the days of going in under the wire because, I just need to get in and maybe I'll get a promotion. That almost never happens. I've done enough living now to know better. And it is better to go in saying to folks, this is my requirement up top at the front, especially when you have the kind of artillery that I have, which is the experience, the education, the know-how, all of that, that I can bring for you and say, these are my requirements based on my experience, based on my professionalism, based on all of these things. So in a nutshell, guys, it was a very inequitable interview. It was successful because I think sometimes as any color folks, but especially black folks. We black folks are always in the seat of teaching other people. It's probably why we are some of the greatest teachers in the world, because we are always in the seat of teaching and educating people, especially when it comes to common decency, but especially as it relates to race and representation. And sometimes God puts us in positions so that we can be the vehicle to show certain people that all Black people or all young women or all whatever kind of person you might be aren't in this box in which you think they're in. I will say this for the millionth time in my lifetime right now, but that Black people are not a monolith. We are all very different, just like all white people are very different, all Latinos are very different, all Asian folks are very different, Middle Easterners, etc., etc., etc. Native Americans, indigenous folks are very different, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We are all very different. And so sometimes we are used as the conduit to show certain others who are not used to, you know, being around Black people or being around Black women in the way in a professional setting, so we're showing them how we are. I said it to my mom about this particular situation. I said, yes, I think I was, brought here. God wanted me to sort of show this individual, or maybe some of the other individuals in the room, that yes, Black people, Black women do come in a size excellence. That excellence is not about, color, and that excellence also comes in the color Black. Okay. And, these days, of course, there's all this talk about DEI and how, now they don't have to hire you if they don't want to, sort of thing. And of course, we know all of that is true. But what has always existed, and I want to also stick a pin in that and also say that Black women have been the last people in within the career jobbing ranks to actually benefit from DEI. There have been more, actually, the highest beneficiaries of DEI have been white women, actually, and white men. It's because you're not only talking about, white women that their diversity right there, but also you're talking about white gay males. You're talking about white, uh, disabled vets. That's also part of DEI. DEI just doesn't cover people of color. It covers white folks as well. And the main beneficiaries of DEI historically and statistically have been white people. So I'm just throwing that out there. But regardless, even before this whole, current climate talk of DEI and wokeness, which people have changed from a term of positivity into a term of negativity, which is very sad. But even before that began, there's always been this issue when it comes to Black people being hired in predominantly white environments. And I've always lived and worked in predominantly white environments, not because I wanted to, but because my expertise and my education opened the door to those kinds of environments that historically have, kept us out. But education, you know, doesn't keep us out. When you're educated, that can't keep you out. It's going to be something else that keeps you out. And most of the time, it's our skin color, right? Or the fact that this person is uncomfortable. Now, that's the feeling that I got during the interview process, that Steve Wolfson was very uncomfortable with me. He did not treat me in a way that was respectful due to his own uncomfortability that he was experiencing at the time. He would barely listen. He was barely listening, as was proven through the fact that he wasn't even asking the questions appropriately or properly, because he wasn't asking things that I had actually said. He was trying to recount something that hadn't been said. So he wasn't even listening or comprehending. He was just there or just listening to what he wanted to listen to. I felt that he was very arrogant. And I'm making this public because there are a lot of comments, or some comments that I've seen on like the reviews. You do the reviews, you look at the reviews for any job that you're, looking to interview for, or whatever the case is. And I looked at the reviews for this job, for this office, and a lot of them are negative. And it's negative as it relates to Steve Wolfson's time in the office, that, the DAs don't do their job, that they're just playing around, that, I mean, it covered the gamut. I was very surprised at that. Also, some of the social media comments about Steve Wolfson himself are very negative. There's a lot of negative stories out there about him. Now, he had told me in the first interview that this is the first time that they had a PIO, but that's actually not true, because I had learned in my actual research for the position that there was a spokeswoman that he had years ago, maybe 5 or 6 years ago, and it was a news story, and she was a white woman. Okay, guys, she was a white woman, and she was a friend of his. He called her a longtime friend, and she ended up stealing $42,000 from him, you know, and he didn't prosecute it. And it was a big story. It was a big thing. If you go and look it up, you can easily find it, because I found it. And I can't believe this is the person that keeps getting reelected, but it seems like the one of the reasons he continues to get reelected is because he goes uncontested. So that's part of it. But I wanted to give my experience with this interview because I also wanted to sort of temper the room as it relates to other people who may be interviewing for a position with the district attorney's office there in Clark County, Nevada, under this particular DA, that he is not respectful. There are people who work in that office and people who were sitting on that panel who may know that, but are not in any position to make the assertions or the comments that I'm making here, because they work there and they simply can't. I have nothing to lose here, but this is a teachable moment for everyone. Perhaps it's a teachable moment for Steve Wolfson himself. If you take a moment, Steve Wolfson, to watch this particular episode of mine, I am very, very appreciative of being called in for the interview, but at the same time, I was abhorred by the way that you treated me in the interview. And I hope that you can, in the future, look at your behavior, unprofessional candor, and unprofessional behavior in the future, and correct your steps going forward. All right, guys, thanks so much for joining me. I'll be back later on with the second episode of today. This has been Casting Court TV, and I will see you soon. Bye, guys.